Douglas knew he was dreaming. He walked through a dark field at night. The grass was ankle-high, black as oil, and it stretched to the horizon in windless sway. The dirt beneath his bare feet was black too, like potting soil, but not as damp. There was no moon in the sky, nor direction in his heart. He simply walked, lifeless dirt between his toes, as birds cawed unseen in the grass. If he strained to see them, he would catch moments of black feathers twitching between the blades, their eyes like voids filled up only with hurt. Douglas stopped. A man lay on the ground ahead, his face buried in the dirt. His clothes were soaked, and a puddle of what he hoped was water had formed around him. "Are you okay?" Douglas asked, without moving his lips. But the man didn't answer. Douglas moved closer and repeated the question. The man still didn't move, but this time he answered. His voice was the dry crunch of gravel underfoot. "So thirsty." A loud knock woke Douglas. He spasmed in his chair and gave out a shout. "Whoa!" Peter stood in the doorway. Douglas looked around his office and situated himself. He had dozed off behind his desk again. He shook his head and apologized. "Noises have been setting me off lately." Peter gave him a condescending look. "You need to relax. Just a friendly tip. No one likes a guy who gets stressed easy, especially Ed." He peeked down the hallway to see if anyone else had witnessed the incident, especially Ed. Douglas rubbed his heavy eyes. "I think I need to get away for a bit." Hit the reset button. Peter stepped into the office and lowered his voice. "Are you crazy? You can't go on vacation right now, not with everything going on." "I know." Peter paused to scratch his nose. Then he smiled. "What? What is it?" Peter nodded. "I know just the thing." As Douglas took a seat in the small waiting room, the pretty girl came out from behind the welcome desk and handed him a clipboard. It held a release form, printed on 2 sides of 1 page, and a pen clipped to the top with the place's name on it. Deep Escape. "Standard stuff," the girl said. "Not liable for anything, blah, blah, blah." She smiled and returned to her desk, where she kept her phone hidden behind the computer monitor. Douglas filled out the form on autopilot. If you've read one, you've read them all. Meanwhile, Peter's words rang in his head. "Did I ever tell you about my brother? The poor guy came back from Iraq with shell shock. I'm not sure what they do exactly, but it's some kind of isolation. No sound, no light. He said he tripped out a bit at first, but by the end he felt like he'd slept for a year." Douglas didn't really care what they did, so long as it worked. He was tired of being anxious about being tired. His mind just needed a little break before it broke. There was no such thing as unseen presences or disembodied voices, just the very real effects of stress on the brain, and he knew he had to treat it in very real ways. He skipped over all the disclaimers and got to the part where he signed on the line. Before long, he was standing in a private room, the size of a bedroom, while an attendant explained the white beast in front of him. "When you enter isolation," the young man explained, "you're in the darkest place in the world." The thing was the width of a large bed, and twice as high. It was enclosed on all sides with a slanted front wall where the door was located. The door had a handle on its left side to open it, as well as two larger ones on the body to hold while climbing in. The attendant explained everything about the treatment, how to get the most from the experience, which specific parts of the brain it stimulated, but Douglas was only marginally aware of him until he asked if he was ready. Douglas nodded, and with that, the attendant showed him where to hang his clothes and left him alone in the tiled room. Naked, his clothes folded on the small bench, he opened the white beast and stepped inside. The water was set to skin temperature, making the transition an easy one. It was like slipping into a second skin, a friendly hand that welcomed him and took him in safely. A voice deep inside him told him not to get in, not to do this, but already the smooth water had won him over. Completely inside, he crouched down low and pulled the small door shut behind him. Dark, true dark, was as unfamiliar to him as it was for most. Accustomed to ambient light as his eyes were, from sun to moon, starlight to streetlight, they struggled to make sense of the complete absence of stimulation. Douglas found the first minute of this new darkness to be dizzying, and he only lay down in the shallow water when he felt comfortable enough to move. He was surprised to find he floated easier than normal, and he seemed to remember the attendant saying something special about the water which gave it that characteristic. As the shadows settled around him, the water no longer sloshing against the side of the tank, his ears, too, fought to understand a loss of constant input, followed by his skin. He lost all sense of time passing. Soon his eyes were creating a show for themselves. Flashes of light formed and swirled above him, and he watched them like a child does a fireworks display. A beautiful burst of color exploded before his eyes. At its center, set like a jewel, a tiny dot of black grew until its true shape became clear. An eye, wide open. The black pupil at the center expanded until it overtook the outer colors completely. Surrounded by pure dark once again, he was jarred by the deafening sound of impact that filled up his eardrums, like a bird smashing into a bedroom window, like the world come crashing down, and he was pulled into the black, all-encompassing pupil, and out the other side, where his hands struggled to regain control of a steering wheel. There was a long crack in the windshield, like lightning eating up the glass. At one jagged junction, a bit of something black stuck up from the broken pane. Douglas watched it with detached horror. His body burned with adrenaline and his eyes stung of tears. In a moment, everything had changed. Sticking out from the glass, waving in the wind, it was hair. He checked the rear view. After swerving noisily a few times, the car had ended up on the side of the road where the river snaked close to the shoulder. There were no other cars on the road, normal for this time of night. He put the car into park, turned the key, and slowly got out. His legs felt uneven, his body unfit for walking, and he came around the front of the car expecting the worst. A man lay on the ground ahead, his face buried in the dirt. "Are you okay?" Douglas called out. No answer. He asked again. This time the man moved his fingers. Douglas rushed to him and turned him onto his side so he could breathe. He propped the man's head up in his lap. The man breathed. Hey, relax. Relax, it's okay. Help. Holding the man's head, he asked, How? Call. His voice cut out painfully. Each word took tremendous effort. Please. Police. Douglas closed his eyes. After taking a quick shower at home, he had poured himself a drink to relax before he went back out to McSweeney's. If he called the police now... Call... I already called them, Douglas said. We have to sit and wait for them. They told me to wait. The man in his arms began to cough. Douglas asked what he needed. I'm thirsty. Douglas looked over his shoulder and saw how close they were to the edge of the river. The water churned past small, smoothed rocks. He tried to lay the man's head back down on the grass, but he couldn't find a way to do it that didn't cause the man to scream out in agony. Instead, he carefully dragged him backward, grunting and sweating to the river until his legs were submerged in it. With one hand, he cradled the man's bleeding head from dipping into the river, and with the other, he scooped up cold water and fed it to him. It tastes like salt, the man complained. It didn't make sense at all. Douglas tried it himself, but tasted only water. It's a river, he said. It's fresh water. It tastes like salt, the man repeated. He took another sip, then looked up at Douglas as he struggled to take a breath. When what? When are they coming? Douglas paused. Soon, just try to relax. The man's gut rose and fell like waves. You didn't do it, he said. Douglas scooped up more water in his palm. Do what? Call. His hand stopped. The man's wide eyes stared up at him accusingly. Douglas didn't appreciate the look. Of course I called. Call again. There's no point. They're already coming. Douglas was starting to get annoyed. The two men locked eyes. They understood each other too well together in that moment. Their lifelines tangled like bad wires, the river gurgling and splashing into them, pushing past their bodies eternally, a moment stretched into lifetimes. Time was nothing. Life had stopped. The man took a great, deep breath, and with the night air loaded into his lungs, he opened his mouth to scream for help. Douglas pushed the man's head under the surface. The scream became bubbles in an ungiving torrent of frigid river water. He wouldn't let this man ruin his life, this stranger who had no business walking along the side of a road at night. The unwelcome weight that hit his bumper and bounced off his windshield. The man who thrashed and swallowed the river with his eyes wide open. His eyes! Douglas opened his eyes. He was in the dark again. Back in the tank. Deep escape. Floating in space, but he wasn't alone. Something was in here. With him. Crouched over him. A presence. A sound. A body without a body which had been following him around. Cold fingers shot out and wrapped around his neck, pushed him down underwater. Douglas looked up, from dark water to dark sky. Even in perfect pitch, he could make out the face of the man above him. It was no surprise. His lungs and eyes burned. He took in great, big mouthfuls of water and noticed, as his vision faded and shook, that it had a strange taste, like the water cooler at work. And he thought back to the attendant who had introduced him to the device he was now drowning in. "In order to help you stay afloat, the water is treated with Epsom," he had said. Epsom! Salt! It tasted like salt. Tight fingers squeezed his throat shut. They turned his vision black, blacker than the water, the dark river that swallowed him down. "You're in the darkest place in the world." Not yet, but soon. All that was left was to give up. As always, I'd like to give a huge, huge thank you to all of my poltergeists this week. Alternative Night, Bobby Tripp, Calderin, Daniel O'Connell, Forever, Gary, Joker Smurf 3, Marksipan, Shadow Blackhawk, Spirit Father, Michael Fawkes, and Brian Horn. As always, all of your support is so appreciated. And thank you from the very bottom of my heart.